The baby boomer generation was born between 1945 and 1964. They had it pretty rough. In part one of this series, we covered DDT fog trucks, the shameful attitudes toward drunk driving deaths, and the plague of dogs running free. Let's take a closer look at a few more things that made things so rough for this post-war gaggle of brats. Here are a few lessons the boomers remember. You'll catch a cold without a coat. Doctors believe in camels. The Gilbert Atomic Energy Lab is a safe toy. Automobiles were insanely dangerous until Ralph Nader's book, called Unsafe at Any Speed, shamed automakers into installing the most basic safety equipment, like seatbelts, padded dashboards, and better tires. And this didn't happen until the late 1960s. The Cuban Missile Crisis put the United States and Russia on the brink of all-out nuclear war. An entire generation of baby boomers were traumatized for 10 days in October 1962. Many callow schoolchildren were unconvinced when the government promised them that ducking under their desks during a hydrogen bomb attack would ensure complete safety. This is the only graph we're going to show. Well, maybe just one more later. This graph shows unemployment rates during the baby boomer working years. The first boomers started working in 1968, and the last boomers started working in 1982. Unemployment rates were terrible during those years compared to today. Unemployment rates were well over 6% most of the time, and near 10% in 1982. High unemployment didn't slack off until the boomers started to retire or croak in 2015. Bullies were a totally unregulated force in the 1950s and 1960s. Boys, especially, had to be ready to fight every single day. When you weren't being bullied, schools dished out violent retributions with perforated maple paddles for chewing gum or wearing blue jeans. Even when you got home, you still weren't safe from having your rear end torn up as punishment for getting paddled at school in the first place. Many 1960s Detroit vehicles rusted out in 3 or 4 years. The Japanese saw a grand business opportunity and seized it. Race riots leveled major American cities in the late 1960s. Everyone was scared to death. Today, we are scared to death of our cell phone dying in the middle of an important concert. The boomers had to put up with some notoriously bad White House occupants back then too. It wasn't all rosy like it is now. Luckily, those characters are long gone. If you went to the doctor with a sniffle, you might spend 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from a tonsillectomy. Slicing a child's tonsils out on a whim finally fell out of favor in the 1970s, just like bleeding with leeches fell out of favor a century earlier. We promise this is the last graph we will show. It's a look at mortgage rates during the prime baby boomer house buying years. The first boomers started looking for houses around 1970, when they were 25. Most boomers were married by then. The 5% mortgage rates their parents got in the 50s and 60s were long gone. Mortgage rates averaged 10 to 12% over most of the prime boomer house buying period. Boomers were extorted with 18% rates in 1982. This type of usury is now known as a credit card rate, not a mortgage rate. All gasoline was leaded. So was the ground, the air, and everything you touched. Leaded gasoline was phased out in the United States in 1996. The rest of the world didn't lose their appetite for lead until Algeria stopped using leaded gasoline in 2021. Did you know drunk driving deaths were double today's rate in the 1960s? Millennials aren't the first generation to worry about the oncoming death of Social Security. In 1983, doomsaying about the end of the boomers' Social Security was spouted with full force. But a bipartisan fix raised the boomer retirement age to 67 imposed a 6-month delay in the cost of living adjustment, required government employees to pay into Social Security, and later taxed boomers' Social Security benefits even more. Boomers had to cough up more cash. But subsequent irrational government expansion of the safety net since then will require yet another fix, and all age groups are going to pay for it. The war in Vietnam started off like the war in Ukraine, except 58,200 people, mostly boomers, died in Vietnam. The phrase, "more boots on the ground," is always bandied about by people who never had their boots on the ground. In 1965, less than 10% of Americans had college degrees, which is almost exactly the same percentage of people who have useful college degrees now. Finally, 1960s transistor radios had zero bass response. Trying to listen to Queen's "Another One Bites the Dust" on a transistor radio was like eating bacon while afflicted with a severe case of addusia. That's about it for now. See you later, my friend.